Pastor Bob. Um, I'm really, really excited about just sharing with you guys for a little bit this morning. And more than excited, I'm just so appreciative of the leadership of this church, and there's so much more than a commitment that they've made to working in this area. You know, it's one thing to say, yeah, we support you, that's a good thing, pat on the back, attaboy, and it's so much more to sacrificially give of time and effort and resources. And I before I ever got to this property, got to this church, I had such a strong sense of the heart that this church has and the leadership of this church has. It's really, really impressive. But I don't have super prepared notes. I have a couple little things, and you know, I want to make sure that this is more conversational if you guys wish, and lots of time for Q&A. I'll share, like Pastor Phil said, I'll share a little bit about myself, the organization, where we're going, and then you know, fire away or interrupt me along the way. I don't mind rabbit trailing. I like rabbit trailing, actually. So anyway, my name is Steve Steinberg. My wife and I have been married for 29 years and 9 months, I think, so 30 years is right around the corner. We're excited about that. We have 2 children. We have a 25-year-old daughter who is getting married in a couple of weeks, and she's a virtual school music teacher, and she's marrying the worship pastor of a church in Fredericksburg, and so we're very excited for them. We have a 15-year-old son who's at Kettle Run High School. We do live in Warrenton. We moved here about 5 years ago. So we live right on 605, and this is just, you know, sort of right around the corner for us. So we really love this area. It's really fantastic. Steinberg is a Jewish name. I don't know if anybody picked up on that, but my blood is 100% Jewish. My mother became a Christian back in the Jesus movement back in the 70s, and so I was raised in a very spiritually sort of unstable place, you know, not exactly with 100% modeling of the walk that we'd like to see, just because my parents were of 2 different religions. And so I became a Christian, I wasn't really exactly raised in it, but I became a Christian as a young adult. And in fact, I remember the time and place. I was driving back from Lynchburg. At the time, we lived in Fairfax, and I was driving from Lynchburg back to Fairfax on 29, and I was right around where the Outback is in Warrenton, right around that spot. It wasn't there back then, but I remember listening to the Bible on cassette. For you youngsters, a cassette is this little like audio device thing. Anyway, I'd been listening to it all the way on my drive down there, and I listened to it all the way on the way back, and I remember just feeling like super hot, like just, I felt like on fire. I mean, not really on fire, but like I just felt like this, after listening to the Bible on cassette for like 6 hours in a day, and I just had this like this immediate like yearning to just read more of the Bible. And I remember it was so sort of new to me at the time that I was like, wow, there's a book called Timothy, and then like, wow, there's a second one called Timothy. And so anyway, that was round about 30 years ago as well. My day job, I don't work full time for Reset 180. I am the chairman of the board, but my day job, I've been in the hotel business all my life, and so, you know, started off working in a kitchen as a pot washer for you youngsters. That's one step below a dishwasher. Like my first promotion was I got to work the dish machine after a while. So anyway, been doing that all my life. It's a lot of fun, great fun. Actually has a lot of intersection with human trafficking stuff in a weird sort of way, just because it happens to be sort of involved in the timelines sometimes. But that's for a different day. I got involved in anti-human trafficking work probably about 12 or 13 years ago. And I'm not going to go into the details of this, but there was a story. So I said I have a 25-year-old daughter. At the time, she was 12 or 13, I can't remember, but there was a story that came out of Europe about a 12 or 13-year-old girl, and I remember it because my daughter was the same age at the time. And it was, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it was a horrific story, and of a girl that when she was 12 or 13, this was 20 years later, but when she was 12 or 13, some things that had happened and had gone on for 20 years, and then this, boom, it hit the news, and she was rescued and all that stuff. But and I'm a stoic, sort of not in touch with my emotions sort of guy, typical stuff, I guess. And I think because my daughter was the same age, the story just broke through whatever, like, calluses and layers and all that stuff that I had built up around my heart. And it really tore me up to think. So my original involvement in anti-human trafficking stuff was not really about trafficking. It was about abuse of children. And it really broke my heart. And I remember just crying out to God, like, how could this happen? And this poor girl, and how could somebody do this? And all the questions that we all have wrestled with at some point in our journeys. And I don't know how you guys, how you individually communicate with God. Everybody's got their way. But I heard, not audibly, but I heard the Lord say a few things to me as I was like just broken in this moment, just weeping and upset and angry and, all that stuff. And he said, and I was expecting some encouragement when I thought that, wow, I think the Lord's saying something to me. I was expecting some encouragement, but what I felt like I got was sort of like backhanded a little bit. And what I felt like he said was, I've been listening to her for 20 years. Where were you? And whoa, it just hit me. But then, just like the Lord, I felt like he was also saying something comforting, which was, but today is a day to celebrate. She's free now. And man, that still gets me when I think about that. But so it started this journey for me of, what does that mean for me? Where was I? Where was I during those 20 years? Distracted and apathetic or unaware or ignorant or whatever. And I took it as a sort of directive in my life to pray for people who were unknown, nameless, faceless, forgotten, marginalized, whatever. I took it as a directive that I was to be in the prayer closet on those issues, and it wasn't any sort of front-facing thing. I wouldn't know the people I was praying for necessarily, but I did that, and I did that for several years. And then I started meeting people who were actually involved. I didn't even know that it was called trafficking. That actual story wasn't about trafficking. It was about abuse of children, like I said. But I started meeting people that were involved in anti-trafficking work, and it just seemed like this sort of natural evolution to starting to get more involved in additional ways. In addition to praying, what else can I do? Which I think is something to talk about when we get to the Q&A stuff about, okay, yes, I can pray for this. What else can I do? And so I connected with a group at the time was called Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative. And it was a ragtag bunch of 4 or 5 people that were meeting on somebody's couch in a townhome in Sterling, Virginia, and just dreaming about, not dreaming, but like, how do we fight this thing? So Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative at that time had been around for a year or two. And it was birthed out of a conversation between a representative in Northern Virginia named Frank Wolf, who is since retired, but had a tremendous compassionate heart for people suffering from oppression of all sorts. And so he had connected with some church leaders in Loudoun County, like a handful, like half a dozen church leaders, and said, why don't we just start this sort of, can you guys start as the church, can you guys start talking about what the church can do to stop human trafficking in Northern Virginia? And so it was originally Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative, which is a mouthful. And that was, at the time, just sort of like, just trying to research and understand, what's the problem, what's the issue, what can we do, where's the vacuum, how can we make a difference? And so there was a lot of time spent on that, but they really landed on a piece, and that was awareness, that they could go around and talk to churches and schools and community gatherings of sorts and just talk about the challenge, the problem, because it was a sort of hidden in plain sight sort of thing. It wasn't, it's not as rare as you think. It's not the, necessarily the Hollywood movie thing either, but it's not as rare as you think. It's around us, and here's how to prevent. And it was all about prevention at the time. And so the group continued in that realm and was fairly successful. Lots of speaking engagements to talk to groups about the problem of human trafficking. And just as a quick little poll, how many of you had heard of human trafficking like 15 or 20 years ago? Had anybody heard of it? I mean, it was really, one gentleman there, it was just unheard. I think it was out there. I mean, the numbers haven't really changed dramatically since then, but nobody really talked about it. But how many have heard of it like in the past 5 years? Probably most of you, right? I mean, the awareness, by the way, this is not just Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative. Something happened about 10 years ago where it was like this worldwide awareness campaign about human trafficking. And I in the rearview mirror, I see God's fingerprints on that. That, it wasn't just Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiatives. There were groups starting all over the country and all over the world where all of a sudden there was like, hey, this is on God's heart right now. Let's tackle this. And so, it was happening 20 years ago. It wasn't that it just started 10 years ago. It was happening 50 years ago. But something happened, and everybody started to become aware and wake up about this reality. And I've seen an evolution of that. It went from 10 years ago where there was this great outpouring of awareness campaigns about anti-trafficking to 5 years ago where there was like this revelation of, wait a second, most people are aware of it now, but what do we do? Like, how do we really impact it? And you can see these sort of incremental changes over time. That's, from my perspective, if you take that sort of 30-foot thousand perspective, it's really cool. Like, that's really exciting that all around the globe, there are ragtag groups of people that all answered that call around the same time, started on awareness, moved into disruption of the trafficking industry, and et cetera. So I'm really excited to see where that goes. But so that happened with Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative. We started as an awareness campaign, and then we started identifying more vacuums that were in the system. Okay, awareness, now we connected with law enforcement, and law enforcement was aware of the work that we were doing. And one day, and this is real, we got a call from law enforcement that said, hey, we're going in on a sting operation and we're rescuing some people tomorrow night. And the only thing we have to do with them is put them in jail. Like, that's the only safe place we have for them. We don't have an option for somewhere else for them to go when they're rescued. Longer term, there's housing and stuff, there's some things we can do to place them, but the initial 24 to 72 hours, they're literally just sitting in jail. Can you guys help us with that? That was a real step in our history where we said, oh, well, that's not just awareness, that's something more. Now we're getting involved more. And so we said, yes, we'll do that. We will take care of them. And there were various options because this started a journey with law enforcement. Sometimes it was, we would get them hotel rooms, and sometimes it was, a safe place, a safe home to be in, and et cetera. And so that was sort of the journey of Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative, was just being in the conversation, so that when these vacuums emerged, that we would say, okay, nobody's doing that, I guess that's us. And so today, Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative has a couple, really three primary foci or areas that we focus on. One is prevention, and that means awareness and training and prevention on, by the way, the supply side. I hate to use economic terms, but on the people being abused, prevention of that, but also prevention on the abuser side. Working with people that have addictions, and I'm not going to get graphic in this, so nobody needs to worry. But so it's prevention is a great big part of what we do. Disruption is the second piece, and disruption means there's a known trafficking circle over here, and we're going to work with law enforcement to go in, and we have counselors that when somebody comes out, we can talk, that will help with them and housing ability and stuff like that. But disruption, there are illicit massage businesses all over the country, but like just in Fairfax County, there's over 90 of them, illicit massage businesses. And let me take a step back for just a second. Trafficking has a lot of different, looks different in different places, and there are different ways that it functions. It's not, Hollywood would have you believe that there's unmarked vans pulling up and pulling people off the streets and driving away, and you don't ever hear of the, it's not so much that in the United States. There's other ways that it works, and without going into details of all this, but there's a lot of social media grooming where people will think that, oh, it's this is my boyfriend, and all of a sudden, they're these bonds that are created that are leveraged later on for bad stuff. But it can also be that there's internationals that are brought here and sort of a forced situation. Their passports are taken away. They don't really have a lot of choice. They're promised a certain type of work and job and living conditions and all that, and then it becomes something very different. That's very common in Northern Virginia. In fact, that's probably the most common way. So it's these illicit massage businesses. There's over, like I said, there's over 90 just in Fairfax County, and it's shocking. One of the things Reset, by the way, I didn't say this, Northern Virginia Human Trafficking Initiative became Reset 180 a couple years ago, just because it sort of a little more generic and vague, but a little more maybe heart and soul in the name, a little more of a story in where we were going. But so Reset 180 is involved in these van tours where you can go around. They'll take you on tours and show you that right there, illicit massage business. By the way, 2 doors down is a church, and that right there, illicit massage business. In between a CPA and a fitness center, and like they're just all. It's really one of those hidden in plain sight things. Very disturbing, very eye-opening. So we do a lot of disruption by going out one night a week, and we have teams of people that'll go out and be in the parking lots in front of these places and talking to people as they're going to go in or as they're coming out, and really confronting them. Not in a, this is done in a very, very loving way, and we're not trying to put anyone in danger on our teams either. So this is a very loving, like, hey, are you aware sort of thing, and if you need help, here's some. But that's on the demand side, because in some way, if for every person you rescue out of this, if you haven't impacted the demand over here, all you've done is create a vacuum that's going to suck somebody else into it. You know, I mean, that's the way the world works, unfortunately. So affecting the demand is really one of the most critical pieces, which, by the way, I mentioned about you can see the evolution of global anti-trafficking work. That really is where the focus is right now, is on the demand side. Yes, continuing with the awareness. Yes, continuing with the healing and restoration for survivors, but really focusing on the demand side. That's been the big focus over the past couple of years. But anyway, so we are involved in disruption by going to these places and just trying to disrupt it. We have a messaging sort of ministry where we've got a lot of information out there trying to contact women involved in this and so that they can contact us and ask for help. So the disruption piece, and then the restoration piece. So it's prevent, disrupt, restore. That's sort of our motto, our tagline, if you will. Prevent, disrupt, restore. On restore, we have counselors that'll work with survivors, and this is really the biggest piece where Dayspring comes in, is on the restoration side. And I'm going to talk about that in just a second, but I want to undergird what I'm about to say. There's a key element of our Lord's heart about oppressed people. Like the Lord has a huge heart for oppressed people. And you might say that he's preoccupied with them. I don't want to overstate that, and I'm not trying to say a lot of doctrinal stuff here because we're not a teaching ministry. You know, we're just here to help oppressed people. But you know, all through the Bible, you can see. So you know, there's a verse in Isaiah 1 that talks about, "Come, let us reason together, and though your sins be scarlet, I'll make them white as snow." In context, that verse is talking about, hey, you guys are doing all these gatherings, you're doing church, you're doing rituals, you're doing all these things, but what about all these oppressed people? What about feeding the hungry? What about clothing the naked? What about, you know, the orphans and the widows, and what about them? Like, and that's the sin that he's talking about specifically. And you see it again in Isaiah 58, you know, loose the bands of wickedness, undo the heavy burdens, let the oppressed go free, and break every yoke. In context, that's also talking about, you know, you guys are doing you're doing the sacrifices, and you're doing, you know, the temple system is working. You know, you're doing that stuff, but it's not meaningful to me if, in the midst of that, there's oppressed people all around you that are suffering and you're ignoring them. Jesus said it too. He said, you know, away from me. You said, you know, I didn't know you. And they're like, wait, we're doing all this cool stuff for you, and there's miracles and there's healings and all this stuff. What do you mean get away from you? He's like, I didn't know. You know, why weren't you visiting the people in the jails and clothing the naked and feeding? You know, like, this is a very common thread of the Lord pointing the finger at his people and saying, you're doing this stuff, this ritualistic stuff, but there's hurting people all around you, and my eyes are on them, and I want you involved with them. Like, that's a primary thing. So I just want to, I say that not as a convicting thing, because Dayspring is doing that. Like, I'm watching that with my own eyes, and seeing that Dayspring is, they get, like, you guys get that message, because, you know, you're not just saying, you know, I guess everybody's aware, but Dayspring has offered some land here, right over here, that we can fulfill this third piece of our mission, which is restoration, to restore. And so they've offered the land here that we can build a home on it, that survivors can transition back into what we might call a normal, stable living situation. But it's, I mean, I've just watched Pastor Phil and Dennis and the leadership of this church, like, just give and I could honestly, it's one thing, it's really cool to say, here's some land, do what you will with it, we support that or whatever. But I can honestly tell you that we would not be able to do this if it weren't for Dennis. I mean, the whole church, of course, but if it weren't for Dennis's involvement in this, we wouldn't know what to do. Like, he has been so key in this, and I don't mean to call you out, but I mean, I just am so appreciative because, he spent countless hours just helping us through some of the bureaucracy type things, which, that's normal stuff. I mean, there were zoning issues to be able to put a home here, and, there's special exception permits and all this stuff. It's complicated stuff that none of us have any expertise in. So, but I've just watched that. The elders have been involved in talking through the arrangement. In fact, we're going to meet after the service today and talk about that a little bit more. And it's just been, I just want to applaud the church, I guess is what I'm saying, is that whether you recognized the Lord's, whether you consciously had verbalized the Lord's heart for helping oppressed people, you're doing it. Like, you get it intrinsically inside what his heart is. And so I think that's just really amazing. So anyway, we are working on building a home over here. It'll be 2 stages. And just to, there's a word called recidivism. It's a fancy judicial type word, but it means people that, the rate of recidivism is like when somebody's commits a crime and ends up in jail. The percentage of people that end up in jail again after they've been freed, or it's the frequency of repeating something, the rate of recidivism. It's usually a pretty negative thing. And so that happens in trafficking as well. And this is shocking. This is like the biggest disconnect I've seen in the church, is understanding how when somebody is rescued, how do they end up back in it? Because the rates of recidivism are actually very high. It's disturbingly high. So everybody tracking with me? Okay. But when you really start to understand the situation a little better, when you really dig in, the reason recidivism is so high is that because most of the people that are trapped in this don't have other options. There's just nowhere for, it's a survival thing. There's a lot of trauma bonds, and we're not gonna go there. There's a lot of spiritual and emotional aspects to this that go really deep. But one of the biggest issues is that a lot of people that are involved in this were at risk to start with. They didn't have stable homes and good examples, and this isn't like somebody growing up in a stable house and going to school every day, having all this support system, and all of a sudden they're trapped. It's usually abuse starts in the home at an early age, and there's a progression to that, and it's bad stuff. But so what happens is they're rescued, and they don't have the skills, they don't have the infrastructure around them. That's a loaded word these days, isn't it? To really transition into what we might call a normal, stable life. And so there is a tremendous vacuum in that arena, in that area, of helping people that are rescued to become, good upstanding citizens, if you will. Right now, I mean, the numbers are sort of ridiculous. For minors that are rescued, there's something like 25 beds in the entire mid-Atlantic, or something like that. The numbers are staggering. Part of that is that the bureaucratic requirements are just incredibly difficult for a lot of people to try to resolve for that. But so anyway, our goal with the restoration piece of our mission is that we would have a home here, and that phase 1 would have some administrative offices for the team, but more importantly, that we could house 5 to 8 survivors at any time, not for a couple of days, not for a week, but like for months, where we can give them the training and we can give them the support and the counseling and the medical care and the, all the things they need. I mean, a lot of times survivors, like, they don't know how to open a bank account. They don't know how to go on a job interview. They don't know how to do an email. That's probably, I mean, at this point, I guess everybody knows that. But, it's just a lot of basic things the basic skills that they just don't have. And so the first phase of this, which would be this group home, will be us working with them, where we can help them to gain those skills, help them get their GED, help them, a lot of times there's a lot of legal stuff in their background that we can help them get records expunged, so that when they go to get a job, it's not getting flagged for, wait a second, this person was in jail at one point or something, So I think you guys all get that. Phase 2 is that we would do these mini homes sort of around the main home, and that people would transition from the group home after 3 to 9 months or whatever, that they would transition into a mini home. And some of these survivors have one or two children, and they could actually have their own. It would be a step, it would be a step for them. Okay, now I'm not in the group home, I'm gonna get a little bit more freedom, I'm gonna have a little bit more, start to figure out who I am versus just healing from this trauma I've been through. And so we would have, I think it's 10 or 12 mini homes surrounding the main home. And so they would be in there for up to maybe a year, and then we would help them, once they have a job, once we find them a place to live, they would move out of that, and then then we've got a space for the next survivors. So that's what's happening here on this campus, on this site, is that we're going to be building those phase 1 initially, and then eventually phase 2. Timing-wise, I think we're probably, 6 months away from having all the right, is that probably right, Dennis? Yeah, probably 6 months away from having the right permissions, if you will. So I'd love to say that, maybe by this time next year, you'll start to see some construction. I don't know. I mean, we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we're just getting all of the zoning right initially, getting all the permissions from the county to do it. And the county, by the way, has been amazing. Like, they are really supportive of this. They actually passed a law that sort of carved out, they basically passed a law just so we could build this here, essentially. And so that was the first phase. Now we have to go through a permitting process to make sure that it meets all of their, the aspects of the law that they wanted to make sure would be met. But, so that's where we are. We didn't rabbit trail too much at all. Nobody's interrupted me, but let me see. What time are we? How are we doing for time? Are we a couple minutes for questions? Okay. Yeah, so that's a whole bunch of stuff for you. I would love to answer questions if you have any, or uh-oh. Lunchtime? Okay. Sorry, I was longer-winded than I thought I would be. Does anybody have any questions? Sir? That's a great question. There will be security systems on the house. This has been a surprising thing to me. I had the notion that when somebody's rescued, that their trafficker or pimp or whatever would come after them hard, Do you know that's not the case? It's the strangest thing. I mean, Hollywood would make you think it's the case. They're so, this is so terrible. I mean, it's actually more upsetting to think of this. They're considered so throwaway that they just move on, um, which is not to say that this isn't an issue that needs to be considered and dealt with, but it's incredibly unusual for a trafficker to fight or chase somebody. And so it raises the question of then why don't more people just walk away? And it's a very, very challenging subject about the spiritual implications, the trauma bonds, the self-worth issues, all of that stuff. It's a much deeper thing, but there will be a security plan. We will have security, probably not 24 hours a day, but overnight and that sort of thing. And obviously there's gonna be, the cameras around and that sort of thing. But we're actually, other homes and the broader study and observation of this issue demonstrate that it's actually not really nearly as risky as one might think. It's a good question, though. Other questions?
What area of Reset 180 home take care of?
What region are we sort of covering? Yeah, it started in Loudoun County and was very Loudoun-centric for a number of years. And then, but it was called Northern Virginia, which obviously meant Prince William and Fairfax and maybe Fauquier County, whatever. Part of the name change of Reset 180 was that we were getting stretched into other areas. Not against our wishes, by the way, but we felt like part of our name change to Reset 180 was that we didn't want to be bound by that. So we really do cover, like we have connections into Maryland even and into DC a little bit. And, I can't tell you that in 10 years we want to be X because we don't. That's really not we're not concerned with that. We're just sort of answering the Lord's next questions about next steps each time as they're presented to us. The Metro DC area, I guess, is the simple answer to your question. Any other questions? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. There are opportunities today to get involved, and there will be more opportunities, obviously, once the house is open. But today, separate from the building here and all that stuff, the easy way to get involved is there's a prayer team that meets once a week virtually. I'm not here asking, we're not doing a collection or anything for Reset 180 today, but obviously you can support prayerfully and financially. But there are other things. You can get involved in the disruption piece where they're going to the illicit massage businesses and talking to people, or they even have people that drive them there and sit in the car and just pray while other people are engaging. There's these text outreach things and that takes a little bit of training. Some of the things anyone can do today. Some of the things require a little bit of training. But getting involved in the text outreach to people who are being trafficked is another way. For those that so desire, like you can get trained in social services and counseling and stuff like that and really get involved in this. But once the home is here, I think there are going to be ways that are a little bit undefined at the moment, but mentoring in different areas and maybe cooking and things like that. They will have a commercial kitchen, and they'll be self-sufficient. But for people who wish to get involved, there are going to be some ways to do that. And there's a very to volunteer with Reset 180. It's not a big complicated process. There is if you're going to be sort of like on staff, even as a team leader, there's a statement of faith, of course, and to be on the prayer team, there's a statement of faith. But that's really the only hurdle, just to get involved at sort of that freshman sort of way. And then there's trainings and stuff if you want to get more involved. But it's a great question. Yes, sir.
You mentioned earlier there are not many homes like this. I don't know if they're in the youth center now. Could this potentially be used as a facility that other regions send their rescue people to?
Could be. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that happens now. Like right now, if, so there's some Youth for Tomorrow is not too far from here, and so it's for obviously minors. But if they're full, they might go to Tennessee or Kentucky or, to another Georgia I've seen. And so there could be some sort of reciprocal, but it's on an availability and a, sort of basis. Yeah. Yeah. Could be. I mean, that's not why we're doing this. It's, our goal is to serve the community here, but Lord knows. These are good questions. Yes, ma'am. Sorry. Yeah, ma'am, sorry. Yeah, right now we're placing the longer term placement. Yeah, there's a couple. So Youth for Tomorrow is the, for minors the one, but there are some other homes in the broader region, but not a lot. I mean, a lot of times they really are. They're going out of state for longer term housing just because there isn't. I would say more than 50% of the time they have to go out of state just because there's nothing around here. Any other? Yes, sir.
So how much communication is going on between Reset and the Family Law communities? Are you guys collaborating with those?
Yeah, we're involved with a group called Samaritan Women that is basically like a mentorship ministry to anti-trafficking ministries. They provide not oversight. It's not like a denomination or something where there's oversight, but they provide training and best practices and that sort of stuff for all phases of what we do. So they're a huge help. In fact, that's been a key piece for us is that we're not trying to, it's that reinventing the wheel thing. There are other groups that have done this. What's their experience? What do they see the need is as far as, for instance, security and things like that, and we don't have to relearn all those lessons. So they're a great resource for us. Okay, well, thank you guys very much. I really appreciate your, it's so much more than your attention or your time. I mean, you guys have really, as a local church community, you really get it, and you're really invested in this in a way that's just been so touching to us. I mean, and encouraging to us. Like it's beyond anything we expected. What we've, the volunteering of the land is one thing, like I said, but the active involvement and interest in this issue and being the Lord's hands and feet and all of that for oppressed people is there's a crown down the road for you. Anyway, thank you. Bless you guys. I'll turn this back over to Pastor Phil.